What's up, guys? My name is Whiskey Emerson, and we are back with episode 2 of season 2 of Legacy, the artist behind the legends. This is the technically the live broadcast, I would say, and so you can find these up on YouTube. So if you ever just kind of feel like watching me do the podcast rather than just listening via iTunes and Google Play, this is where you can find me. So this week we are covering Charles Bukowski on the podcast, and I'm so excited. I've spent all week reading Bukowski shit, and oh my god. I know it sounds crazy, but I've had such a blast doing it. I've had such a great time getting to understand this writer, and I'm really looking forward to this episode. So let's just get it rolling, shall we? And here we go. Henry Charles Bukowski, born Heinrich Karl Bukowski, was a German-American novelist, short story writer, and poet active during the mid to late 20th century. Holy shit, where do I even begin with this guy? Well, to start, his writing was deeply influenced by his own life, and many of his works were relatively autobiographical, centering on the social, cultural, and economic environment of Los Angeles, where he lived for the majority of his life. To give you some perspective here, Bukowski wrote thousands of poems, hundreds of short stories, and 6 novels, altogether publishing over 60 books. The themes of his work reflect his own experience with writing, with working total crap jobs, bad relationships with women, and as you could probably guess, alcohol. And believe me when I also tell you that the FBI kept an open file on Charles for decades after World War II, and as a result of his column Notes of a Dirty Old Man, which ran in an underground LA newspaper called Open City. This week will be a tad different than usual, everyone, and that's due to the fact that so much of Bukowski's work is based on his own life, and otherwise details on him are relatively limited. This means we will dive into a series of excerpts from 2 of his more famous novels and determine ourselves just who the man Time magazine pegged a laureate of American lowlife really was. Grab the drink of the week. You're going to need it. And let's get episode 2 of season 2 started with none other than Charles Bukowski. I'm Whiskey Emerson, and you're listening to Legacy. Happy Friday! How is everybody doing? It's Whiskey Emerson here, and I am so excited to be back with you guys for Season 2, Episode 2 of Legacy, the artist behind the legends. So, brief homework period here, as everybody is used to at this point. Tomorrow, May 12th, Saturday, for all of my Portlandians who are fans of my novel West of Hell, I actually have a signing at the Barnes & Noble up here in Beaverton. It's from 1 to 3 p.m. Please come out. Even if you're just a fan of the podcast, I would love to meet you guys. I've got to meet a couple of you guys at my previous signings in Portland and in a couple of other places, and I love having other literary nerds just come out and share the love with me. So that will be Saturday. Also, you guys, if you have bought my novel, West of Hell, and you enjoy it, please leave a review for me on Amazon, etc. You know the drill there. Also, I'm super thrilled. I had a great surprise this week. It was a relatively low-key week for me at home, and I got an email. I was nominated for the Portland Monthly, which is a magazine here in Portlandia, for their Women Up campaign, and it's a total honor to be nominated. And I've got an event on Saturday after my signing where I get to go meet all these lovely ladies like myself who are, just trying to better the culture and the environment of Portland. And I couldn't be happier to be nominated for something like this. It's very cool. So thank you guys very much. Also, on top of that, let's cut back to the podcast because that's why we're all here, right? If you aren't aware yet, I have a Patreon page up, and that can be found at www.patreon.com/legacypodcast. So if you're a fan of the podcast, if you're a fan of me, if you just are kind of a literary nerd who will listen to certain episodes of this with the writers you really, really love, back me up here and become a member, because you get all sorts of perks. I will share show notes with you guys. I actually have a video demonstration of the drink of the week every week if you sign up, and so many other things. And the goal here is to be able to get better recording equipment, get more merch for you guys, fun things like that down the road that I would love to be able to do. So if you're interested in that type of thing, definitely go look up my Patreon page. And if you haven't already, please go leave me a review on iTunes if you love this podcast. If you hate it, you know how this goes. And now that homework is out of the way, hi guys. God, it's so good to be back. I know I said that last week, but I really missed the podcast in my months off. I loved traveling. I loved being able to work on my novel and do a lot of the things that I was doing. But there's something so special about being behind this microphone and doing the research every week on these artists and these writers. I fucking love it. And I'm so happy to be sharing it with you guys. So thanks for sticking with me. And let's just do this. All right. So drink of the week with our artist is... It's a Boilermaker, and I haven't had a Boilermaker since I was in college. And if you aren't aware, basically a Boilermaker is your choice of beer and your choice of a shot of whiskey or bourbon. And sometimes people such as Charles Bukowski would drop said shot into beer and drink just to, liven up the beer a bit. Others, like myself, tend to do a 1 ouncer on the side with the beer and just kind of go back and forth until I get through both. It's completely up to you. This week, I'm kind of just letting you guys have a hall pass, and whatever drink you want to drink, just have it this week, because I'm not going to throw a Boilermaker on anyone. It's kind of a terrible combination. I'm having a gin and tonic with extra lime this week because, honestly, I was at an event with my husband before this, and my husband works for Rogue Brewery, as a lot of you guys know already, and I already have had 2 beers. So I beered out. I'm sticking with carbonation, but I need to get away from it. So I'm going gin and tonic. Do what you guys got to do. I totally get it. So anyway, let's dive in to Charles because, oh man, have we got some ground to cover. So, best known works. First up is Ham on Rye, which is very autobiographical. Also, I would say his second, as far as novels go, is Post Office. And those are just his novels. And obviously, you guys know I'm focusing on those because I myself am a novelist. He has so much good poetry out there, you guys. So if that's something that really interests you, I mean, he has so many great collections of poetry, and they're all over the place, so... Take your pick, but those are his 2 more groundbreaking novels, and they're definitely the 2 that I think tend to resonate with his name. I definitely read Ham on Rye at university, and so yeah, I mean, take your pick there. But anyway, bullet points, lifeline. Let's go, right? So Charles Bukowski was born on August 16th of 1920 in Germany to parents Heinrich or Henry Bukowski and Katharina Fett. And Henry was a German-American in the U.S. Army who occupied Germany during post-World War I. Though instead of returning home, Henry stayed in Germany as a building contractor in the hopes of making serious financial gains in the aftermath of World War I. If you guys aren't super familiar with World War I, it just fucking destroyed Germany. So I think basically here Henry's just sticking around in the hopes that he can make a lot of bucks by helping rebuild the country. So there he met Katharina, and they had an affair, and Katharina was apparently a German friend of Henry's sister, and soon little Charles was definitely on the way. And I don't really know why, this is kind of a weird addition here, but Bukowski throughout his life was consistently very adamant that he was born out of wedlock. But in reality, the marital records from the city he was born in actually indicate that his parents did marry about a month prior to his birth. So I'm not really sure why he rode that as hard as he did, but he consistently said in every interview whenever asked about this that he was born out of wedlock. So, I mean, maybe if that's what he wants to go with, that's cool, but, Whatever, Charles. Crazy train. We're on it with you. So, sadly for Henry, Germany was dealing with crippling reparations post-World War I that left the economy stagnant and inflation was just like at a ridiculously high level. He struggled in vain to work around these sanctions and couldn't, and so as a consequence, the Bukowskis moved to the United States, setting sail for Baltimore on April 23rd of 1923. A few years later, in 1930, after a brief childhood stint in Baltimore, the Bukowskis moved on to live in southern central Los Angeles, where Henry, Charles's father, was actually originally from. Unfortunately for Charles, his early adolescent years were not exactly a walk in the park. His friends would often give him shit about his very strong German accent, and they gave him the nickname Heini. I kind of think that's funny, but that's just me. And his father was often unemployed throughout Bukowski's teenage years, and this frustration was often taken out on Charles. I mean, his father would both verbally and physically abuse him for just anything that he was irritated by. And this included, I'm not fucking joking, Charles being beaten with a razor strap 3 times a week from the age of 6 to 11. In reflection later in life, Charles declared that this helped his writing and he came to get a grasp for undeserved pain, something he would often voice in his work. But what? Like, oh my God, that's so brutal. Jesus. Bukowski was also cursed with horrifically bad acne as an adolescent, causing him to be introverted and somewhat withdrawn. And I mean, I totally get that. I had terrible acne in my teenage years, and it was a huge insecurity of mine. I mean, to this day, I mean, it's just something I deal with, and I know that sounds stupid and ridiculous, but bad acne in your teenage years when you're already dealing with all sorts of other shit, like, it really does stick with you. So it was during these years that Charles was introduced to alcohol by his friend William Baldy Mullinax. And Baldy was the son of an alcoholic surgeon. So what's actually funny too is Baldy is actually the character Eli LaCrosse in Ham on Rye. So if you're more familiar with that, you know, like I said, very autobiographical in his writing. So this is a quote, by the way, directly from Charles that has to do with alcohol, and I think it's pretty relevant to this point. And he says, quote, "This alcohol is going to help me for a very long time." And this is a phrase that Bukowski later was quoted as saying in reference to like the event of being introduced to alcohol, and that booze then became a method he used in trying to come to grips with his just kind of depression and rage and the abuse he dealt with as a kid. So Charles graduated from Los Angeles High School and went on to attend Los Angeles City College for 2 years, excelling in art, journalism, and literature courses. You would expect that, obviously. And then he ended up dropping out when World War II commenced. Immediately, Bukowski moved to New York City with the intentions of becoming a writer while holding on to whatever blue-collar job he could find while he was there. And these varied pretty consistently, but it was just kind of whatever he could get his hands laid into. Then something weird happened, and he has kind of weird run-ins like this throughout his life. So on July 22nd of 1944, Bukowski was arrested by the FBI in Philadelphia, where he was living at the time, I guess. I think he rotated around the New York area. And the reason the FBI arrested him, that they said originally, was that he was under suspicion of draft evasion. But in reality, the incident occurred during a time, because obviously this is during World War II, and Charles's German heritage was just troubling to the U.S. government, especially when there were lots of German Americans that the U.S. kind of suspected of disloyalty. So for 17 days, I'm not kidding, 17 days, Charles was held in the Philadelphia prison there. And eventually, after another stint of time, he failed some kind of psychological evaluation that the FBI claimed to be a part of his mandatory military entrance physical test, which is a mouthful by itself. But he ended up being dismissed as unfit for military service. But it sounds like a load of horse shit to me. I think they were just worried about German Americans, and when they realized that this guy just was kind of a nutcase and had nothing to do with the World War II, they let him go. So, my personal opinion, but do with it as you please. So for a few years, Bukowski found very limited success in his writing dream, publishing only 2 short stories until he chose to give up the literary world entirely. And the next 10 years of Charles's life, he described as the 10-year drunk. And these are also known as the lost years, where he produced no writing whatsoever. And during the decade of binging, Bukowski lived primarily in LA, though he spent a lot of time just kind of roaming as a vagabond throughout the United States. He would work sporadic seasonal jobs here and there when he was traveling, and he would stay in super cheap boarding houses along the way. I mean, while he was in LA, he worked in a pickle factory for a little bit of time. He did his first stint at the U.S. Postal Service in the early 50s for roughly 3 years, and then in 1955, Bukowski almost met an early fate with a nearly fatal stomach ulcer, which hospitalized him and thus just kind of ended the bender for him for a hot minute. So hold on, I need to have speaking of benders, I'm gonna have a drink here. Cheers, guys. So once Charles was out of the hospital, he began to write poetry again, and here is another curveball for you. In 1955, he agreed to marry small-town Texas poet Barbara Fry, sight unseen. So if you guys aren't familiar with what sight unseen means, it means they were probably pen pals, they never actually met, and then they just got married. So he had never really seen Barbara before, and they just decided to get fucking married, I guess. Jesus. So they were married for 3 years and divorced in 1958. I mean, what the hell, though? I don't get that at all. But let's also not forget, so this is a little tidbit, too. Barbara later died under mysterious circumstances in India that no one is sure about, but she died there. So there was a weird bit of speculation about Bukowski revenge. I don't know. I don't think he had anything to do with it. I'm sure she just got some sort of illness and died, but whatever. Anyway, so following the divorce and this weird little 3-year period of his life, Bukowski started drinking again, and again also continued to pursue writing part-time, finding smaller publications to feature a handful of his poems and essays here and there. 1960 marked Bukowski's return to the U.S. Postal Service, where he worked as a letter filing clerk for over a decade. And this, of course, would inspire his first novel, Post Office. We'll get to that down the road. Now, sadly, in 1962, Charles was utterly destroyed by the death of a woman named Jane Cooney Barker. They'd been together for a couple of years, and she was kind of his first and arguably his last real romantic attachment. And this catalyzed a series of poems and stories just lamenting her death. And he really had a dark period for about a year, and he just kind of went into total introvert mode and wrote and tried to express himself that way. But it didn't take him long to find someone to fill the gap. And in 1964, Charles had a daughter with his then living girlfriend, Frances Smith. This was not a long-term thing, by the way. I think this was like something that just grew out of nothing. And he would call Frances a number of nicknames, and not affectionately, might I add. And they included the white-haired hippie, shack job, and old snaggletooth. Nice. Super nice, Bukowski. Jesus. Anyway, sorry. I just find that so terrible and hilarious at the same time. I mean, can you imagine your significant other calling you old snaggletooth or shack job? Oh my God. Different time, guys. So around the start of 1967, Charles wrote a column called Notes of a Dirty Old Man. And this was for the publication Open City, which was an underground newspaper. And about 2 years later, when Open City shut down, Bukowski's column was picked up by the Los Angeles Free Press and also the New Orleans underground newspaper Nola Express, just kind of setting the stage for Bukowski to kind of at last pursue writing full time. So at age 49 in 1969, Bukowski accepted an offer from Black Sparrow Press alongside publisher John Martin, finally quitting his job at the post office and dedicating himself to his writing. This is a great quote. I loved hearing this one, and I wanted to include it in the podcast. And he said about this decision, quote, "I have one of two choices: stay in the post office and go crazy, or stay out here and play at writer and starve. I have decided to starve." Fucking love that. So in under a month after quitting his USPS job, Charles finished his first novel, Post Office, and this catalyzed a long-standing partnership between John Martin and Bukowski that would last until Bukowski's death. So, to put it mildly, as we endeavored to tread into the personal relationships of Charles Bukowski, I will say this. He had an immense amount of trysts. And I'm going to say trysts because I would not exactly call them romantic relationships. And this also included, like, I'm sure a shit ton of one-night stands and things of that nature with a variety of women, many of whom do make cameos in his novels and his short stories and in his poetry over the years. And if I'm honest, like, they are not depicted in a very pleasant light all the time. Then, in 1976, Bukowski met Linda Lee Begley. I think that's how you pronounce her name, Begley. And this is a woman described as numerous things, including a health food restaurant owner, a rock and roll groupie, an aspiring actress, an heiress to a fortune out of Philadelphia, and follower of Mayor Baba, which was an Indian spiritual master who said he was the avatar of the age meant to bring an enlightening to the world, who died in 1969. So about, 7 years before then. She sounds kind of weird, but she also sounds kind of awesome and like somebody I'd like to have a beer with. So anyway, over the next 2 years, they had kind of an on and off again relationship, living together for a while and then not, but they did eventually marry in 1985. And Begley is portrayed as Sarah in two of his novels, Women in Hollywood. And now I've read Women. I haven't read Hollywood, but now that I've read Women and I realize that this is the woman he's talking about, I just would say, wow, that's all. That's the only input I have. Anyway, it's no secret that Los Angeles was Bukowski's favorite subject to write about. In a 1974 interview, he said, quote, "You live in a town all your life, and you get to know every bitch on the street corner, and half of them you've already messed around with. You've got the layout of the whole land. You have a picture of where you are. Since I was raised in LA, I've always had the geographical and spiritual feeling of being here. I've had time to learn this city. I can't see any other place than LA," end quote. So in the 60s and in the 70s, Bukowski was also known to do live readings of his works, which always included heavy drinking and combative banter with the audience, which sounds like a hell of a good time to sit there with Bukowski and have him read to you, argue with you, get drinks with you. I mean, I would 100% be on board with that. There's a lot of back and forth about Bukowski being a cynic, as both a man and as a writer. This is something that came up quite a bit. And it's something I think is fascinating, because that was a misconception I've had about Bukowski for a number of years, which I always thought of him as a cynical, just kind of... I thought of him as the cynical, dirty old man, if I'm completely frank with you guys. And my opinion has changed so drastically. And I love this quote that he has, which says, "I've always been accused of being a cynic. I think cynicism is sour grapes. I think cynicism is weakness." And that just resonates with me on such a deep level, because after spending this week with Bukowski, basically, I've been diving through his poems, a couple of his books, etc., etc. I don't think of him as a cynic at all. I mean, if anything, he is just a goddamn realist, and he just sees what he sees and he tells it just how he sees it. And it's something that I I really respect about him. There's no embellishment, there's no romanticism. It is just, when it's dirty and gross, it's exactly how he writes it. And I find that amazing, and I think that's just something that so many other writers lack the talent of being able to visualize in their writing. Now, one critic described his fiction, I also love this too, as basically a detailed deception, a detailed depiction of a certain taboo male fantasy. The uninhibited bachelor, slobby, antisocial, and utterly free. Which, yeah, that is 100% what Bukowski is. He is all of those things in his writing. And I don't think it's a disillusionment. I think it is just literally what he was. And that by itself is just incredible. So, taking a quick break here from standard timeline that we typically do, we are going to expand upon Charles Bukowski through some excerpts of his writing. And I've picked out some of my favorites here. And thankfully I have these books with me, and I've already taken them out, the excerpts out that I want to read. But I think they will provide a better perspective to really help you sink into the mind of this man, because I can throw his life facts at you all day long. But until you actually read him, I think you won't understand him. So to help you guys gain a better perspective on who this guy was, let's just listen to him. How does that sound? So these first excerpts are from his book, Women. And this is a book that I was super hesitant to read. My husband's had it forever. And I was hesitant to read it because the first day that my husband read it, he just kept looking at me like, I don't think this is for you. And so this week, of course, I love being challenged. And so I immediately picked that one up first. And I was like, I'm going to do this, goddammit. And I did. And it was kind of, it really altered my perspective on Bukowski. So I picked 4 excerpts. So let's just read through these. So the first one is this one. Pain is strange. A cat killing a bird, a car accident, a fire. Pain arrives, bang, and there it is. It sits on you. It's real. And to anybody watching, you look foolish, like you've suddenly become an idiot. There's no cure for it unless you know somebody who understands how you feel and knows how to help. That's the first one. Number 2. Women. I liked the colors of their clothing, the way they walked, the cruelty in some faces. Now and then the almost pure beauty in another face, totally and enchantingly female. They had it over us. They planned much better and were better organized. While men were watching professional football or drinking beer or bowling, they, the women, were thinking about us, concentrating, studying, deciding whether to accept us, discard us, exchange us, kill us, or simply to leave us. In the end, it hardly mattered. No matter what they did, we ended up lonely and insane. All right, let's pause for a drink here. Third excerpt. When I was young, I was depressed all the time, but suicide no longer seemed a possibility in my life. At my age, there was very little left to kill. It was good to be old, no matter what they said. It was reasonable that a man had to be at least 50 years old before he could write with anything like clarity. The more rivers you crossed, the more you knew about rivers. That is, if you survived the white water and the hidden rocks. It could be a rough cob sometimes. I think that's my favorite one. And then this is the last one from Women, and this is one that I didn't type this one up because I'm not gonna lie, I was kind of unsure about this one, but I feel like it's a good one because this actually, in a more real way, depicts what this book is about. And this is whilst the main character is having multiple relationships with multiple women. And so let's start here. I walked about feeling worse and worse. Perhaps it was because I'd stayed over instead of going home. It was like prolonging the agony. What kind of shit was I? I could certainly play some nasty, unreal games. What was my motive? Was I trying to get even for something? Could I keep on telling myself that I was merely a matter of research, a simple study of the female? I was simply letting things happen without thinking about them. I wasn't considering anything but my own selfish, cheap pleasure. I was like a spoiled high school kid. I was worse than any whore. A whore took your money and nothing more. I tinkered with lives and souls as if they were my playthings. How could I call myself a man? How could I write poems? What did I consist of? I was more Bush League de Sade without his intellect. A murderer was more straightforward and honest than I was. Or a rapist. I didn't want my soul played with, mocked, pissed on. I knew that much at any rate. I was truly no good. I could feel it as I walked up and down on the rug. No good. The worst part of it was that I passed myself off for exactly what I wasn't, a good man. I was able to enter people's lives because of their trust in me. I was doing my dirty work the easy way. I was writing the love tale of the hyena. I stood in the center of the room, surprised by my thoughts. I found myself sitting on the edge of the bed, and I was crying. I could feel the tears with my fingers. My brain whirled, yet I felt sane. I couldn't understand what was happening to me. Oh, all right, so just a quick pause there. So Women actually is, it's basically about the alter ego of Bukowski, a guy named Henry Chinaski. Sorry, I'm butchering the names tonight. And this is just, he's basically depicting what his life was kind of like in the 70s, you know, as he's meeting Sarah, who we later actually found out is someone that he was actually with, and the other women who really, truly were a part of his life, and how he just starts to feel like shit when he starts to realize that he's actually hurting these people, and what does it all mean? You know, what does any of it all mean? And I think we all have moments like that in our life. So, continue on to Hammond Rye, which kind of goes to, I would say this is more of the pre-Bukowski. This is the novel that addresses his childhood and the difficulties he dealt with his father and with his mother and with growing up. So here's the first excerpt that I want to read from this. Gathered around me were the weak instead of the strong, the ugly instead of the beautiful, the losers instead of the winners. It looked like it was my destiny to travel in their company through life. That didn't bother me so much as the fact that I seemed irresistible to these dull idiot fellows. I was like a turd that drew flies instead of like a flower that butterflies and bees desired. Ooh. Basically, it's how he's starting to find his pack of people. And he's not impressed by them. But at the same time, he's also not impressed by himself either. Next up. The problem was you had to keep choosing between one evil or another. And no matter what you chose, they slice a little bit more off you until there's nothing left. At the age of 25, most people were finished. A wild, goddamned nation of assholes, driving automobiles, eating, having babies, doing everything in the worst way possible, like voting for the presidential candidate who reminded them the most of themselves. Not even going to stem into the current event connections we kind of have there, so I'll skip beyond that, but I will say this, coming from somebody who I feel like I personally have led an unconventional life and plan to for the rest of my life, I completely understand that. And I also want to say I respect the shit out of anybody who wants to be a white picket fencer, because that takes a whole other level of commitment that I'm not sure as a person I have. So I'm not saying anything biased against it. It's not my life choice. But anyway, just a couple more, guys. So here's one that I think really, yeah, we'll just get into it. And my own affairs were as bad, as dismal, as the day I had been born. The only difference was that now I could drink now and then, though never often enough. Drink was the only thing that kept a man from feeling forever stunned and useless. Everything else just kept picking and picking, hacking away, and nothing was interesting. Nothing. The people were restrictive and careful, all alike. And I've got to live with these fuckers for the rest of my life, I thought. God, they all had assholes and sexual organs in their mouths and their armpits. They shit and they chattered, and they were as dull as horse dung. The girls looked good from a distance, the sun shining through their dresses, their hair. But get close up and listen to their minds running out of their mouths. You felt like digging in under a hill and hiding out with a Tommy gun. I would certainly never be able to be happy, to get married. I could never have children. Hell, I couldn't even get a job as a dishwasher. Ooh. So, in context here, like I said, Ham and Rye is kind of the origin story here for Bukowski, I think is the best way to put it. And so, at a very young age, he's really starting to realize that this normalcy that he's seeing around him in so think about post-World War II life. It is completely 50s housewife, have kids, cook at home, dad works 9 to 5, comes back, wife has dinner on the table and a martini in her hand, the children come home from school, everything is hunky-dory. That is the life of a white man at this time. And Bukowski is basically throwing caution to the wind and saying, nope, not for me. And he knows that in his adolescence, which is pretty phenomenal when you think about it. So the last quote, it's very short, I promise, is the one that it's my favorite Bukowski quote. And as a writer, God, it hits me hard. And it's, quote, so that's what they wanted, lies. Beautiful lies. That's what they needed. People were fools. It was going to be easy for me. End quote. Woo! Just hits you your very core. And this is after he's basically had an interaction with class where he makes something up, and it's very widely respected and applauded, and he realizes, oh, yeah, that's all I have to do. Anyway, so the last thing I want to touch on here is just that it's just been an amazing week for me. You know, I had so many preconceived notions about this man, and my mind has completely changed reading his novels. And I would highly suggest, if any of you guys have preconceived notions about Bukowski, give him the benefit of the doubt here and just dive into something, because it'll change you. My perspective on so many things has changed as a consequence, and good gracious, I think he's brilliant. I never thought I would say that, but I think he's truly brilliant. So, on March 9th of 1994, Charles Bukowski died of leukemia in San Pedro shortly after finishing his last novel, Pulp. By the time of his death, Bukowski was regarded as one of the best-known American authors and was considered to be an established part of the 20th century literary canon. In the years that have followed since his passing, I mean, Charles's popularity has never wavered at all. And if anything, it's just expanded and gotten bigger. On his gravestone reads the phrase, "Don't try," which stems from one of his poems about inspiration and creativity. And I know a lot of people see "Don't Try" in his gravestone, and they immediately go to the pessimism, the cynicism, like we talked about earlier. But that's not what it is at all. So, in a previous letter to a friend named John William Corrington from 1963, Bukowski elaborated on this poem and his advice to young writers. And basically, he said this quote right here: "Somebody at one of these places," one of the places he frequented, bars, whatever, asked me, "What do you do? How do you write, create?" He says in response, "You don't. You don't try. That's very important, not to try, either for Cadillacs, creation, or immortality. You wait, and if nothing happens, you wait some more. It's like a bug high on the wall. You wait for it to come to you. When it gets close enough, you reach out, slap out and kill it. Or if you like its looks, you make a pet out of it." I think that's so brilliant as a writer myself, because you can't just decide you're going to write a story one day. The story has to be in you. It has to come and get you and find you. You can't just sit down and go, "Oh, hey, I'm going to write this today, and it's going to make me into this person, or get me these things, or give me this whatever." That is not how creativity, imagination, or any of the writing world works. And I think that is the brilliance behind the "don't try." It's not "don't try." Of course, you fucking work your ass off when it comes to you. But until it comes to you, you do have to wait. Because otherwise, it's all fabrication. So, conclusion. Charles Bukowski was undoubtedly a dirty old man, but he was also one hell of a prolific writer, and he used his writing to cast a light on the downtrodden and the depravity of American urban society. There were critics who found him absurdly offensive, and there were others who found him to be a cult hero, focusing on hard living through oftentimes, graceless language and intense, violent, and sexual imagery. Fuck yeah. The dark truth of his words, stemming from Charles's own personal reality, sets him apart from so many other writers of his day, a reality that, instead of abiding by the post-World War II glory of American life, openly centers what people even to this day find taboo subjects: infidelity, alcoholism, depression, anxiety, sex workers, being broke, and the like. I think Adam Kirsch of The New Yorker put it best. He said, "Bukowski's poems are best appreciated not as individual verbal artifacts, but as ongoing installments in the tale of his true adventures, like a coming book or a movie serial. They are strongly narrative, drawing from an endless supply of anecdotes that typically involve a bar, a Skid Row hotel, a horse race, a girlfriend, or any permutation thereof. Bukowski's free verse is really a series of declarative sentences broken up into a long, narrow column, the short lines giving an impression of speed and terseness, even when the language is sentimental or cliched." Oh, so good. Adam Kirsch. Hell yeah, man. Charles Bukowski didn't care if the truth was ugly. He just merely chose to write exactly what his reflection in the mirror portrayed: uncompromising and real. Cheers to you, Mr. Bukowski. What a fucking trip this week has been, my friend. And let me say I am happy to actually call you my friend now. So, whiskey's recommendation. The two I read from: Ham on Rye and Women. Now, as a little bonus here, so when I was living in New York, there are tons of little book stands all over the roads. And my husband found Charles Bukowski's poetry collection that's entitled On Cats. And I just wanted to read this one to you guys because it's kind of a lighthearted one to end the podcast here. So this one's called Wearing the Collar. I live with a lady and 4 cats, and some days we all get along. Some days I have trouble with one of the cats. Other days, I have trouble with 2 of the cats. Other days, 3. Some days, I have trouble with all 4 of the cats and the lady. 10 eyes looking at me as if I were a dog. Oh, so brilliant. Love it so much. All right. Moving on for Bukowski. Next week for episode 3, everybody, we are going to cover the life of English writer and philosopher Mary Wollstonecraft, a woman way ahead of her time on paper and one of the first advocates for women's rights. Wollstonecraft was active in the later part of the 18th century, and in her very short life, Mary revolutionized the conversation of female and male equality, though of course, in typical historical fashion, it was Mary's personal life that intrigued most up until the 20th century, and this personal life can be described as extremely unconventional for her time. Surprise, surprise. Additionally, Wollstonecraft was the mother of Mary Shelley, who we covered in a previous episode, and Mary Shelley, if you guys don't remember, is the author of Frankenstein or The Modern Prometheus. Talk about one hell of a good mother-daughter legacy. So anyway, that is episode 2 covering Bukowski. Next week, Mary Wollstonecraft. But thank you guys so much for being here with me. If you want to know more about me, you can find me www.whiskyemerson.com. The podcast is www.legacywithwhiskey.com. Please leave me a review. Please definitely go check out the Patreon page, guys. You know, the more support I can get for you, the better, and just the more fun we can have with this. So if you really do love the podcast and you want to get involved, please go check out the Patreon page. Anyway, I hope everybody has a fabulous weekend. Get outside, enjoy yourselves, have a couple of drinks, and chill out. And I will see you next week for episode 3 of season 2 with Mary Wollstonecraft. Cheers. Hey guys, so we just wrapped up season 2 and can't wait to take these things off. Jesus. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. I didn't make a lot of eye contact this episode. I'm so sorry. I was just so into it, and I got in the zone, as you can probably imagine with Bukowski. So anyway, I love you guys. Thanks for being here. Just keep tuning in if you love these YouTube episodes. I'll have them up every week. Also, if you hate them and you don't see a reason, you can let me know that too. But cheers, guys, and I'll see you next week with Mary Wollstonecraft. Have a good weekend.